Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
It's just torture and murder. No plot, no characters. Very, very realistic. I think it's what's next.
Psycho in the Bronx, submitted by Ilana. I was 17 in the summer of 1981, living with my little sister Mary in an old brick building off Southern Boulevard in the South Bronx. Back then, the borough felt like it was bouncing on a matchstick. Whole blocks looked like a war zone. I'm talking buildings burned out and hollow with windows punched black and empty. There was graffiti everywhere, and especially on the subway cars. At night, the elevated tracks threw long metal shadows across the street, and I remember it feeling like it looked like prison bars. You could stand on our roof and just see rows and rows of buildings that had been gutted by fires, and some of them just were shells with staircases just hanging there. People were actually saying landlords were torching their own properties for insurance purposes. Others were saying it was gangs doing it for territory reasons, but either way, fire trucks were everywhere. Our building, I guess, was one of the lucky ones. It hadn't been torched. It was a 5-story building, and it had this front door that I remember never shutting quite right unless you kicked it hard. But we had really great neighbors. I remember Mrs. Riviera on the second floor. She grew tomatoes in buckets on her fire escape. And Mr. Donnelly on the third floor always listened to the Yankees on a radio so freaking loud you could hear it all the way on the roof. You know, it wasn't Better Homes and Gardens, but it was ours. I remember in July of that year, it was hotter than hell. That kind of heat that just sticks to your back and makes everything taste funny in the air. My sister Mary was 8, and I remember her begging my mom for some ices from the bodega on the corner. She obviously couldn't go alone, so I told my mom I'd get some. It was a time of night where it was still light out, but the streetlights were just starting to flicker on, and I walked down to the bodega to get the ices. It's funny thinking back, but I can remember this so clearly. I remember some kind of salsa music coming from a window open somewhere, and a car with no muffler roaring up and down the street. I got to the bodega, and it always smelled like coffee and bleach and overripe bananas. That's another memory that's always stuck in my head. I grabbed 2 cherry ices from the freezer and put them on the counter, and that's when I felt like someone was watching me, and I don't mean the guy at the counter. I turned around and saw a guy leaning against the cigarette display. He was probably in his early 20s, tall, thin, hair slicked back with something that caught the fluorescent light. He was wearing a wife beater and jeans, and his eyes creeped me out the most because he didn't avert them when I looked at him. They were stuck on me, and they stayed stuck on me. Looking at me, he said, "You live around here?" And I didn't answer him. I didn't know him. I just handed the cashier my money. Then he said, "Yeah, I've seen you before. You're on Southern, right? The building with the busted door?" I remember getting really nervous at that point. I mean, he wasn't guessing. He knew where I lived. I blurted out, "I got a boyfriend," which was a complete lie. But he smiled at me and said, "I didn't ask you about a boyfriend. I was asking where you lived." I just took the ices and left without another word. But I could feel him behind me before I heard his footsteps. And again, another vivid memory, the street seeming longer than usual on my way back. Everything just felt heavier. He kept yelling at me, "Hey, wait up." And he wasn't loud and he wasn't angry. It was like this was a game. It sounded like he was having fun. I didn't look back at him, and I remember him saying, "Hey, you don't gotta act like this." But his steps were steady behind me, and I honestly think it might have scared me more if he'd been running. But he wasn't. He was just walking fast right behind me. Across the street, and I remember the L thundering overhead, shaking dust loose from the metal beams, and for a second the noise swallowing everything and that guy disappeared. But when it passed, he was closer. "What, do you think you're too good for me?" he asked. That's when I broke into a run. The ices flew from my hands and hit the sidewalk, and I just kept running. I didn't stop until I got home. My lungs were burning, and I could hear his sneakers now behind me still, though, that slap of rubber on the concrete. And then I thought of that stupid broken door, and I remember thinking, oh God, please be open, please be open. I banged up into it and I yanked on it. Of course, it stuck. Behind me, this guy's shadow was stretching along under the streetlight that was now casting a lot more light than it had been before. I kicked the door hard one more time and it banged inward, and I just threw myself inside and slammed it shut. But I heard his hand hit the other side a second later. "Open up," he said through the crack. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't pounding on the door, he was calm. My heart felt like it was going to jump through my ribs, and footsteps clattered down the stairs above me. I heard Mr. Donnelly's radio going in his apartment, and it just seemed like life was going on like nothing else was happening. I didn't answer this guy, I just stood there shaking. And after a few seconds, everything was quiet. I stayed pressed against that door for a full minute before I dared to look through the narrow wired glass pane. But I saw him, across the street now, standing under the streetlight, just staring at my building. He stayed there for a few minutes and then walked away. I didn't tell Mary what happened. I told her I'd drop the ices and that we would get some more tomorrow. She was upset, but hey, what are you going to do? I locked our apartment door and pushed the kitchen table against it, even though I knew that wouldn't do much. My mom worked nights, by the way. So, all night, every sound felt like it was going to come through the door. Every creak of the pipes, every car backfiring in the distance. Around 2 a.m, I finally drifted into a shallow, nervous sleep. And it was the smell that woke me up. It wasn't smoke at first. It was something sharper, like burning plastic. But then came the screaming. I shot up out of bed, and the hallway outside our apartment was glowing orange under the crack of the door. I jumped out of bed screaming, "Mary, Mary, wake up, get up!" And the smoke began coming in. I grabbed my sister's hand and pulled the table away from the door, and when I touched the door, it was warm. But I had to open it. We didn't have a fire escape. Heat blasted my face, and I could see flames down the hallway. Someone was yelling that the lower floors were on fire, and I remember it feeling like it was alive, all the popping sounds and wood snapping and glass breaking. We lived on the 4th floor, and the main stairs were already choked with smoke. Mrs. Rivera came out of her apartment coughing, clutching a wet towel to her mouth and saying, "It's the 1st floor. It started down there." My mind flashed to that guy, the way he'd been standing across the street staring at our building. Mary was crying, the smoke was getting thicker, and someone yelled, "Fire escape!" So we ran down the hall towards the back window, and when I pushed the window open, more black smoke billowed. But that's when I saw someone else, and not the guy from the store. There was another guy, maybe in his 30s, on the fire escape below us. He was helping a woman from the 3rd floor climb down. "Come on, you guys," he yelled up at us. "Get going now!" The metal ladder was hotter than hell under my bare feet, and Mary clung to my waist, sobbing. The building was roaring behind us like a living thing, and as we glanced down, and as we climbed down, I looked towards the street. Through the chaos of flashing lights and gathering neighbors, I saw a familiar shape standing near the edge of the crowd. That guy, wife-beater, jeans. I couldn't see his face clearly through the smoke and flashing lights, but I knew it was him. Fire trucks screamed to the scene, and firefighters were everywhere, hauling hoses, blasting water against the brick. Half the building had been engulfed by the time they got control of it, and windows were shattering and raining glass onto the sidewalk, so we had to stand on the other side. We made it to the ground just as part of the 5th floor collapsed inward with a deafening crash. And that stranger who had helped us, his name was Louis, and I learned later, had wrapped a blanket around Mary's shoulders saying, "You're safe, you're safe." I didn't feel safe. I looked through the crowd again, but that guy was gone. Investigators determined that the fire did start in the lobby with an accelerant. This had been deliberate. Thankfully, no one died, but half the building had been destroyed, and we lost almost everything. But no one was ever arrested, nothing ever became of it. The good news is that my mom had been dating a guy who lived up in Queens, and we moved to a really great neighborhood, where there was nowhere near as much trouble as what was going on in the Bronx. He had plenty of room in a really nice neighborhood, and he happily had us move in. He became my stepdad a year later. But While we were up in Queens, I swear I saw that guy again, across the street from a building that Mary was playing in, just leaning against the fence looking at me. I couldn't be 100% sure it was him, but I remember a chill running down my spine. Obviously, I never saw that guy again, but I am convinced in my heart of hearts that he is the one who set that fire, and somehow at the end of the day, it was my fault for turning him down. Maybe that's just in my head, but I guess I'll never know. But I'm telling you, it was an awful time to be in the South Bronx, and it was an awful night I'll never forget. Paranormal Experiences, submitted by Anonymous. This is a small compilation of my most terrifying encounters with paranormal entities. Since I was a little kid, I've seen, heard, and felt ghosts in different places. The first encounter I can clearly remember happened when I was about 5 or 6. I saw a tall man, not a shadow, not a figure, an actual man walking into our kitchen. When I ran after him, he was gone, and the kitchen had a door that led to our patio, which was small and completely enclosed, but it was empty. When I described the man to my mother's father-in-law, he was convinced that I had seen his own father, who had passed away several years earlier. A few years later, when I was about 12 or 13, my mom divorced her husband and we moved into a new house, just the two of us. The first night, I felt a strange energy in my room, but I tried to ignore it and assumed it was only because the place was new and unfamiliar. I fell asleep and in the middle of the night had a nightmare, or at least I thought it was a nightmare. Later, I realized I was having sleep paralysis mixed with something much worse, a visit from the old woman who had once lived in the house. In my dream, she climbed onto my bed and got on top of me and pressed her face inches from mine. And then I woke up. My eyes were open and the old woman was still there, her face twisted in anger, her hands wrapped tightly around my neck. I couldn't move, just like in sleep paralysis, but I can say with absolute certainty that she was real and standing in my room trying to choke me. I was terrified and passed out from fear. My eyes were filled with tears, and by the time I lost consciousness, I could barely see. The next morning, I told my mom everything. She didn't doubt me for a second, and she too had her share of paranormal encounters. She immediately cleansed the house, and for the remaining 3 years that we lived there, I never saw that old woman again. And this final story I'll share was the scariest one of all. After moving from that house, my mom and I relocated frequently. At one point, a friend of hers offered us a small townhouse in a rough-looking neighborhood, and since she wasn't charging rent, we decided to move in and save money. The moment we walked inside, both my mom and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The entrance opened into a long hallway, and even on the brightest days, the place barely received natural light. It was also oddly cold, something especially strange in Cuba, where it's hot year-round. At the time, I was in high school and would get home hours before my mom, leaving me alone in the house most days. But I never felt truly alone. I would hear footsteps in the living room while I was in another room, and when I watched TV, I felt the heavy sensation of being watched from behind. I even saw dark shapes moving behind the television screen, all in broad daylight. One night, the same night we decided we couldn't stay there any longer, everything reached a breaking point. And I kid you not, we'd only lived there for 1 week, and 1 week was all it took for us to decide that paying rent was better than living with an angry spirit. That night, my mom and I slept together in the master bedroom. There was no way I was sleeping alone in my room. The bedroom was a large, square layout with the bathroom only a few steps away from the bed. The bathroom door faced directly towards us, and I fell asleep and dreamed again. Except this dream felt too real. I woke up and looked toward the bathroom, and suddenly I saw a blonde woman in a long white dress stepping out of the shower area, even though that part of the bathroom wasn't visible from the bed. She rushed toward me, and just like the old woman years before, she grabbed me by the throat. And then I woke up, but she was standing right there, choking me. My mom felt movement in the bed, and it was me struggling to pull the woman off of me. She immediately turned on the light and the figure vanished, and I told my mom everything. We stayed awake for hours, sharing everything strange that had been happening and agreeing that the negative energy in that place was far too strong for us. The next morning, we packed and moved out. I know some people might not believe this, but in my culture, seeing, hearing, and feeling spirits is not unusual.
Hey gang, wanted to give a quick update on something a little odd and something that has never happened in the many years that I've been doing Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. In the Valentine's Day episode, there was a story about a woman named Mary Ann, and I got an email from someone who had a picture and said, "I think I know who Mary Ann is." Now, obviously, Mary Ann is not the real name of the person. I don't know the real name of the person. I don't care to know the real name of the person. But the person who submitted this picture said, if you still are in contact with the author of that story, shoot this to them and see if it's the right person. Now, I was a little wary of doing that because it's kind of a story that dredges up a lot of shit, I guess is the best way to say it. And I certainly don't want to cause anybody any undue stress. But I did respond to the email of the person who sent me the story about Mary Ann and just said, hey, I've got someone who sent this picture. I don't want to dredge anything up, but if you're interested and you'd like to confirm, I can send you the picture. Strangely enough, the person said, yeah, go ahead. So I sent it to him and he responded just today. It's been more than a week or so that I sent this to the author. And he just wrote back, son of a bitch, that's her. I'm weighing whether I should share that with everybody or not, but I'm waiting on permissions for that too. But just an interesting little twist. Like I said, I've never had this happen before where a listener said, hey, I think I know who that is. And again, I don't want to stir anything up here, but if I do get permission for that, I will send it. Obviously, it's going to be heavily edited in a fashion that it's not going to reveal the identity of the person because I don't need to get in trouble and get sued. But if I can pull that off, then I will share that with you guys. Anyway, just wanted to leave that note here. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.